All of that used to be the Son of God and narrowed it exclusively down to one man alone. That's not biblical, because Adam is called the Son of God even in the Gospels.
So now we have this concept of, again, apotheosis, men become gods. Also men have become the son of gods, like Augustus. And we see in the church fathers, many of them were actually literate. They weren't illiterate. That's because a lot of them, they had a background where they were pagan, like Justin Martyr. Yeah, so they actually converted, and they were afforded. They were afforded high levels of education because of this rich, wealthy background they had, and they converted. Justin Martyr, speaking on that topic, he mentions in his apology, I think Justin Martyr writes how many pieces of, about 3 I think, and we have letter to Tripod the Jew, and we also have the apology, and he writes one segment in regards to business apology. He's writing to the Greeks and whoever is.
Of course, he's not apologising.
Yes.
Apology means a defence.
It's a defence, like apologist.
Because I might apologise to you, but if you're writing a defence of Islam, that is technically an apology. In that sense.
So who is he defending to?
Justin Martyr was a Greek philosopher, highly trained, literate guy, expert in Greek philosophy. Became a Christian, and so then he went on the offensive and defended Christianity, an apology, a defence of Christianity to the pagans, or we would call the Romans, basically, defending Christianity. But he said some things which to us sound strange. He defended the idea there were 2 gods. So you had God the Father, who was the God, and then there's a lesser God, who was Jesus.
So it's like binitarianism.
Binitarian, it's not even Trinitarian.
So Larry Hurtado, who's one of the most famous scholars of recent history, he writes a book, I think it's called How Jesus Became God, and this was in engagement of the topic with Bart Ehrman also got involved in, how Jesus became God. And he mentions the earliest evidence we have shows that the Holy Spirit was never a partaker of any divine worship, and he uses the word binitarian devotion.
Yeah, no, that's very true. We see this in John's Gospel very clearly. The focus is on God and his Son and the Father, all the way through. It's never 3, it's 2. So that's binitarian. The Holy Spirit is never identified as God, it's not worshipped as God, it's not seen as the third of 3 at all. In fact, nowhere in the New Testament are they. And sometimes people say, what about Matthew 28, where he mentions Jesus is made to say, because it's not really historical, go and baptize in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. The thing is, mentioning 3 separate persons or individuals is not the same thing as the Trinity.
Yes, exactly.
Because I may mention Fred, John and Mary all went out together. It doesn't mean I believe that they are 3 co-equal, consubstantial beings. You could say that the Father there is God, the Son is his Son, in whatever binitarian sense you want, and the Holy Spirit is God's action in the world, like he inspires the spirits. That's not Trinitarianism. Whatever it is, it's because there's no mention of the 3 being one God.
So then he mentions Justin Martyr in the apology, the first apology. So we have like 2 apologies, one I think we lost, one that we have, and then the letter to Tripod the Jew. He mentions what you say of the sons of Jupiter is no different to what we say of Jesus. Yeah. So why do you think, do you think at that time at least that the Christians of that age were making similarities, borrowing, or there was some kind of syncretism?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think there was an attempt to, as there is today with a lot of Christian theologians who would try and make their faith acceptable to a modern liberal secular age, so that they will change their doctrines. We see this at the moment, I think, in the Church of England. There was a survey recently in the Times, came out 3 or 4 days ago. The majority of clergy in the Church of England, the priests and the vicars, no longer, but they believe now that fornication is perfectly fine. The gay sex is perfectly fine. Sex outside of marriage is perfectly fine. This contradicts the teaching of the Bible. But I think they're going along with public opinion. Public opinion is so important to the Church of England, to that kind of acceptance as the national church. So they're changing Christian doctrine so it doesn't offend people. And I think in a kind of analogous way, Justin Martyr, when he's looking at it interlocutors, these pagan philosophers, and some of them were very sharp, and they knew how to critique Christianity.
Celsus, Papyri,
particularly him.
Julian.
So he's saying, look, we're not that different. Like the Church of England's doing now. Look, hey, we're pretty much similar. Don't see us as weirdos.
Yeah.
We believe in all this stuff too. We're quite similar, really.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, you're letting the world, be it paganism or public opinion, dictate your doctrine.
Your theology.
And this is what the Quran is very clear. There's a wonderful verse in the Quran, obviously I don't know the Arabic, I can't remember where God accused the Jews and the Christians of making Jesus the son of Mary and their lords and their monks gods alongside God, or lords alongside God. And there's a fascinating hadith about this. It says, well, a Sahaba said to the Prophet, they don't worship these people, they don't worship their bishops. The Prophet said, but do they make what is
halal,
haram halal,
which is permissible, non-permissible,
and what is not permissible? And the Sahaba said, yes, they do. And the Prophet said that is their worship of these
They've
people.
changed the law, so for that changing of God's law, them changing God's law has made them lords.
Their rabbis or their monks or their bishops or their vicars. And I think that is an incredible insight in the Quran. What gets me is this was true 1,300 years ago. It's still very fresh and true now in 2023.
So the next point, so we're on this point now of Justin Martyr, Syncretism, apotheosis. The church fathers also believed in that God became a man, so man can become God. And we mentioned Now, moving on to the critics of Christianity, which you mentioned, Celsus, Papyri, even I think Julian, they called Julian the liar.
The apostate.
The apostate, that's right, yeah. So one of their criticisms, in fact, which is a common thread in their writings or their criticisms of Christianity, is that it's nothing new. What did they mean by that?
Sorry, who was saying?
Celsus was arguing against the Christians that what they're saying in regards to Jesus being the Son of God, that he was, we've seen this in Jupiter and Zeus and everything, is nothing new.
Well, in that sense, they were saying Hellenistic Christianity was a variant of the kind of Gentile religions that the world has seen for centuries. And I think in one key respect that's true, because if you look at the way Paul, the Apostle Paul in the Bible, talks about Jesus, it's through the death of Jesus we are saved, through his blood on the cross and so on. This sounds like other mystery cults in the Greco-Roman world.
Mystery cults.
This kind of Christ mysticism, and that if you eat the Saviour through her bread or flesh, this is very familiar to the pagan world, and so it's very acceptable. So I'm not surprised that Paul's gospel did quite well, actually, in the Greek world, but it did particularly badly though amongst Jews. And why was that the case? Because most Jews knew, if they knew their scriptures, that you didn't eat God, and that God didn't become a man and die. That they knew that God was Yahweh who made all things. It's an Islamic understanding, actually, I think, of God.
So I think many modern day scholars, looking back at the historical Jesus, no longer believe that is a statement that first century Palestinian Jew is likely to have said.
Yeah, I've not come across any scholars ever who have argued that the historical Jesus believed that he was Yahweh. I've literally never come across anyone who's ever said that. I don't mean preachers, I don't mean Bible teachers, I mean actual experts.
I mean in regards to the eating of the flesh as a Jew.
Well, the Eucharist, that's more controversial. There are some Catholic scholars who would defend that. But the idea of Jesus believing he was God is, I've never come across that. But you see, he would have had to have believed he was God if he was God, because God is the all-aware.
You mentioned the Gentile church. Is there another church, or was there another church?
Yeah, there were lots of churches. There was a number of Gentile churches. Paul mentions them in his letters. He talks about some people, I follow Peter, they say, or I follow Paul, I follow James. But there was the original church, I would argue, in Jerusalem. And these were... He's just saying hello to Mum, I think. And these historians call these the original Jewish Christian community, and what centered around Jerusalem, where obviously the temple was, and that was headed up by a guy called James, who multiple independent records tell us was the brother of Jesus, and he was elected or appointed by the apostles themselves. They actually mentioned by name Peter, John, please forget who else, to actually head up the church, and he was the head of the community.
That's Peter, John, and James. That's what you're looking for.
Not James, he didn't want itself.
No, the three pillars of the church, I think you mentioned, huh?
They were. Yeah, but the apostles appointed James, and he was the head for until he was murdered in the 60s. And his religion was not what we call Christianity, and yet he led Christianity. If you like, he was the head of the Jesus movement, the original Jesus movement, amongst people who actually knew Jesus, based in Jerusalem. Paul, on the other hand, never met Jesus. And his followers, the Gentiles mainly, of course never met Jesus, because they didn't live in Jerusalem. They lived in Corinth or Rome or whatever.
So we have two different Christianities, and I think there was more. I think there was more. This is just a basic one. I think there was a church that set up in Antioch.
You have the Marcionites in the 2nd century, you have the Gnostics, you have the Ebionites, you have the Proto-Catholics.
So there's multiple Christianities with scholars. There is no orthodoxy.
Correct.
Orthodoxy is something which was created later, which involved the element of power.
Nice definition. Tabulation, the element of power. I like that. That's a good definition.
So we had the Jerusalem church. I think Acts mentioned like 120 believers. At the head of it was James, who was preaching. It involved Mary also in it, and we know from the Council of Jerusalem, James is the one that headed that council. These are the indications that give scholars understanding. Yeah, and I think they say James died roughly around the year 62.
And James portrayed at the Council of Jerusalem. He says, he speaks as the head of the church. I have decided X, without going into the issues. Peter's not saying this, which is what Catholics believe. It's James who is saying this. He is even in the Bible it says, it doesn't say he's the head of the church, but it shows him being head of the church, making sovereign decisions which affect everyone.
And this is why there's so many scholars today. James Tabor, for example, will recognize James as being the head of the Jerusalem early church, which were the disciples. And then you have this Pauline church, which effectively went out to the Gentile world. I think Paul initially preached to the Jews, but found out he was being rejected a lot by them.
Well, that's it. You see this in the book of Acts, the history of the early church. It actually shows you his modus operandi. He initially goes to a synagogue, preaches his gospel, is almost always rejected, kicked out, stoned, whatever. Then he goes to the local Gentile population. The question is, why are the Jews constantly rejecting what Paul says? And why are the Gentiles constantly accepting what he says?
Because he said, sorry to cut you, he said, I received the 40 lashes minus one multiple times, and this is a Jewish persecution.
Exactly. So clearly the Jews didn't recognize him as an authentic, authority at all. The way he was preaching was so alien that they just vomited it out. He was seen as some kind of scoundrel. But the Gentiles, of course, we talked about the mystery cults, where you had these communal meals where you devoured the deity. Paul's version of eating the body and blood of Christ, 1 Corinthians, is very familiar. But we have other Jewish Christian accounts of the Last Supper that are Didache, which are much more Jewish and have nothing to do with the body and blood. Jesus is not a sacrifice. The bread and the wine is just the bread and the wine. And there's no reference to body and the blood and body of Jesus.
So one of the things that James Tabor, brilliant scholar, which you invited on your channel, which by the way is Blogging Theology. This is Paul Williams, if anyone doesn't know by now. Great channel if you can, obviously subscribe to Blogging Theology. So we have James Tabor. He argues that Paul and James often come into conflict. When we read the Gospel of James, the letter of James, we see a message which revolves more around the life and the message of Jesus. There's no crucifixion. There's no focus on his birth, his death, his resurrection. But when we go to Paul, we hear very little of the words of Jesus, but there's a great focus on his death, his resurrection, and so. Was it that James was addressing Paul, because he did say many times, "O fool," he says in James, "O fool, should I show you that salvation is through works?" This seems like the message that Paul was teaching. That
James, the letter of James. I mean, I want to agree with you. I don't really. The problem is, the problem is the letter of James. Even in the early church, Eusebius, the early church historian, queries who
authenticity.
It's not that it's authentic. We don't know who this guy is. You say James or Jacob, actually, to give it its correct Hebrew name. There are lots of Jacobs around, and the letter wasn't known to be by James in the early years. It wasn't like it was always circling, God, we've got a letter of James, wow. It was only much later this letter started going around by James. Eventually got into the canon. So to say that it's by Jesus' brother is in my view, an unsubstantiated assumption. It could be. We don't know. There's no evidence. We don't know who he was. Like Marys, there are lots and lots of Marys in the early church. There's Mary this, Mary that. The Gospels are full of Marys, you know. Which Mary? So to use Mary, James, that letter as a foil to Paul, you can do that because they're both in the Bible, but I have no reason thinking it's
But nevertheless, it shows that there was a community that had this writing, that believed there was someone who was teaching lawlessness or faith without works.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what James, whoever James is, I think it's James chapter 2, says that we are Abraham.
That's right.
So I did a little footnote here. I'm reading the Jerusalem Study Bible at the moment. Okay. It's this eminent Jewish translation of the Tanakh, as they call it, with by 200 of the world's top Jewish scholars, and a commentary in the translation. And I'm just sort of finishing Genesis, and they repeatedly, it's published by Oxford University Press. This is a bit of classy scholarship, all right? What's interesting is the Jewish commentators repeatedly refer to Abraham as a Jew, as an Israelite. And I thought, whoa, I really didn't expect that, because having read the Quran, and also if you follow the chronology, Abraham lived long before the Torah was revealed to Moses, hundreds of, many years before. And as the Quran says to the Jews, Abraham was not a Jew or a Christian. He was someone who submitted to God. He was a submitter, in other words, brackets, a Muslim.
A Muslim.
And I was just always shocked that how it is apparently quite typical in Judaism for them to think that he was a Jew, and he wasn't. Anyway, back to Abraham in James. So James was justified by his works.
Abraham was justified by James.
Abraham
was justified.
The whole point is, Abraham was justified by his works. What he did.
Sacrifice.
Exactly. So the Isaac thing, for example, the Isaac story. Paul, of course, Paul does say in Romans that we are justified by faith. And indeed, if you follow Martin Luther's translation, justified by faith alone. In other words, sola fide, as the Reformation slogan has. So here we had two opposites, and they're not really compatible.
Yeah, the thing is so we have James talking about faith with works, and he says, should I show you my faith with works and you show me your faith without works? Because it's impossible, obviously, to show it. But then he gives the show of Abraham. But Abraham is the very same example which is given by Paul. He said Abraham was justified by faith alone. So it's like this reply in James seems to be addressing Paul. Anyway, so going back, so Paul, you mentioned, James, you mentioned scholars ascribe it to, not scholars, communities ascribe it to James. But reality, we don't know if this is a truthful ascription. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So we don't know if this ascription was genuine. But this is the same of Matthew, Luke, Mark, and John. So again, we're in doubt as to who these authors are, why they were written, when they were written.
We don't know who the James was. You can argue quite plausibly that there was a James.
James, of course.
But you can't anymore argue that, say, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the Gospels, attributed, because they are anonymous. And that's different. We have no idea who wrote the Gospels. It seems reasonable that James wrote James. We don't know which James.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the problem. So there's that slight difference. So none of them are forgeries because they're not making fake claims. But there are other letters in the Bible that are making claims, like 2 Peter, which are forgery is where there's a deliberate intention to deceive the reader into thinking the author is someone other than the real author. And there's someone other is usually a famous person, like an apostle. And that is a deliberate attempt to deceive people. Now, if you're going around and trying to deceive people, that's not a good thing. That's condemned in the early church. So here we have a bit of devilish trickery in the Bible itself.
Devilish trickery. So we have this with Paul's letters as well. I think Paul is responsible.
They only had two, huh?
Yeah, that's fine, man.
Just put it here, man.
Oh, this was for
Very
Jamie.
kind, sir. Thank you so much. Very kind. I don't know who this is. Where's Dawood? Thanks, sir. Yeah, so you should have a conversation.
Yeah, we will have a conversation. Let me finish with Mr. Paul, and then
We're going to have one as well.
yeah, sure. We can have friendly discussion. Yeah. Paul, are you? I feel like I picked your brain a lot.
You picked it. You completely picked my brains to pieces. Yeah. I got one grey cell left.
Can we get rid of that one grey cell? Yeah.
Show me no mercy.
So we got the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we know there's similarities in them. This is called the synoptic problem, and it's often the scholars come with solutions such as a two source theory or the four source theory of the LMN, the L source and the M source. Which one was our first gospel, in your opinion?
Well, I'm not a scholar, so I can tell you what scholars think. The first gospel is usually considered to be the Gospel of Mark.
Gospel of Mark. And then they say Luke and Matthew copied from Mark?
Yes, precisely that. And that's the problem, because often the copying is very obvious. I mean, all the Gospels are in Greek, and sometimes if you look at the passages and put them in parallel columns, it's identical Greek, everything, not just saying of Jesus, but incidental narrative and all the bits and the pieces, the conjoining bit, exactly the same. But other times, you see the differences. So sometimes it's the same and sometimes it differs. So it looks like they're copying, and then other times they're diverging from. So this is called the synoptic problem. Synoptic meaning you see together, syn meaning with or together, object as you see them together. You can see them together and they're very similar, but they're differences. So trying to explain the similarities and the differences is the problem. And scholars, I think, have now pretty much sorted it out. In the last 100 years, they've got it sussed at the point of virtually everyone.
So they say that Mark and Matthew, which are later productions, copied from, Matthew and Luke, which are later productions, copied from an earlier Mark.
Yeah.
But they also suggest that Matthew and Luke had a common other source, which is known as?
Q.
Q source. What is the Q source?
Q, now I always mispronounce the German, but I always do.
Quell, is it?
Anyway, I call it quell.
Yeah, I said the same
That's
thing.
not correct, apparently. I spoke to a German the other day. He came out with a completely different pronunciation. We agree on the spelling, but I can't speak
Have you
German.
yet accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?
No.
Have you yet?
Come speak to me. You're going to speak to me?
Yeah, I'm going to text you.
Yeah,
You
Allah, we
have your
speak.
Quran, you believe in Islam as well.
mashallah. Come afterwards, come after. Yeah. Nice meeting.
Stop jumping, man.
Huh?
Your conversation is like
No, yeah, mashallah. Okay, let's call this thing,
Okay,
but
yeah.
I need to pick your brain again. It's been a
Have
pleasure.
mercy on my great
I know. I feel like I jumped you as well, but it's a pleasure to speak to you, Paul.
I think you need to pick on talk to some fresh Christians.
No, that was a good conversation. Yeah. Was it not?
Oh, it's good.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to pick your brain.
I knew all this stuff anyway. We rehearsed
No, but you have to play in it. You have to play along in it. I was trying to get, I think I got this. Yeah. It's back on camera. Yeah, Bilal, how's everything, man? Sure, yeah.
good.
Yeah, you know Bilal is.
And Paul anyway.
Yeah, you know Paul, right?
Alhamdulillah, very well.
I was thinking,
Yeah, cool.
Hamza is an old friend. We go way back.
Really?
He's in Saudi. He was in Saudi.
Is that why?
Yeah, exactly.
way back.
And way back.
I thought you would be in Saudi today.
I know, my visa's ready, Paul. I need to.
You just get on that plane, dude.
I know. I'm trying to squeeze everything. I'm so grateful I spoke to you, actually. You know, that was one of my what do you call it? Yeah, the thing you have to tick off.
Yeah, but a couple of weeks ago we were sitting in a cafe for several hours.
For other people's experience.
No, we won't.
Do you want one, Paul?
What is it?
That's a tuna meal.
Yeah.
Help yourself. Ali Dawa kind.
Ali Dawa tuna sandwich.
Ali Dawa.
I can't tell. Well, I was giving Dawa to this guy, but you know he's very stubborn.
Thank you. You want something?
No, I'm good.
How's everything, man?
We're gonna eat in a bit, so no point.
Yeah? Oh, you're gonna go with them?
Yeah.
Sometimes sometimes.
Just one more. No, have it, please.
What's that?
Come on.
You sure?
Yeah, please. No, God bless you. So, yeah. How's the dawah going? What is your main focus? Podcasts, or how do you classify your dawah? Discussions, educating.
Still here?
Yeah.
No, barakallah fi, I'm going to eat. Assalamu alaikum.
Don't really know, actually.
I'm going to eat later, inshallah.
Say again.
I don't really have an answer to that. I don't really have. I'll just
Go with the flow.
yeah, that's a good one. Go with the flow. What about you?
At the bottom of Edge Road, somewhere.
Behind the scenes and more like
It's like wind, isn't it?
Yeah, is it? I think it's that.
more like doing courses and stuff, that training for du'at. Yeah.
I don't know if it's the
I
same.
don't know if you heard about Islamic awareness through mosque tours.
Today hasn't been great.
So this is one of the
Today
things I
hasn't been
do.
great. I have a lot of
I go around
crazy
training imams and things like that.
Wow.
crazies. I had the crazies today.
Oh,
You trained him,
sorry.
didn't you?
I thought you like crazy indeed.
Hamza, nice to meet you.
And you, Tony. Nice to meet you.
Tony, yeah?
Good to see you, mate.
Good show.
Because I saw you on, I've seen a couple of your videos, bits of them, and it seemed like you were a really reasonable guy who didn't play the usual tricks, and you gave people space and you shared the time. You certainly seem to know a lot about Christianity. It sounded like you did, so I thought, great. So it'd be worth chatting. So I'd like to, if it's possible to get constructive dialogues, that'd be cool.
Yeah, sure. So, Paul Williams
I
was
would
just
shake
with
your hand,
us.
but
I know.
Yeah, he was just here now. We were having a discussion. I don't know if I shared the discussion. Maybe you could just find some kind of opening where we are in the discussion.
Probably not my field. It sounded like you were quite deep into the text and Paul's interpretation of, and that's really not what I
No,
do
we
at
went
all.
all over the place. We started with apotheosis, the concept of man becoming God, and then its incarnation in Greek models. So Julius Caesar, for example, he died, as soon as he died in the Senate through a process which is known as apotheosis. It's a Greek idea, man can become God. And we find this also in early Christian writings, which actually forged, like the letters of Pilate.
I'm totally out of my depth.
No
You do
worries,
realise
no
that,
worries.
okay?
We're learning from each other. So in this letter, apparently, which is ascribed, and falsely so, to Pilate, but shows the intentions of Christian writers in the early ages,
Yeah.
that they wanted, Pilate wanted, I think it's the Emperor Tiberius, I think if my memory serves me right, to be elected for apotheosis and become a god and join the pantheon of gods. Now this is what the early Christians forged a letter, the letter of Pilate, saying that Pilate wanted Jesus to also move from the state of man to be a god. But these are Greek models, and Christianity wasn't.
Can I grab one as well? Or no?
I'll just leave it. It usually picks.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So
That's
this is.
fair.
Yeah. So is it debate or? Because I usually go
My
for this
intent, I think
one.
it's good to have intent. I like to meet people I can talk with. Like I've known Dawood now for a while. Yeah? I really respect and love Dawood,
Nice
okay?
guy.
Because I think his intent is always good, and that's what I value.
Yeah, that's
so
good.
we have good discussions, and I like to get those with people wherever I can. Occasionally I've fallen out with Muslims because there's one guy I won't mention who suddenly we hit a hot spot, and I didn't like that. Maybe I was being too presumptive, but I don't
Sometimes
like
we
it when
get spirited, right? Speakers call, everyone goes crazy.
yeah, I mean, not good. And I've got a kind of clear line between when we're talking about physics and objects. It's very different to me from when we're talking, thank you,
Are you sure?
between when we're talking about ethics and teleology and this stuff and metaphysics. That's what I'm interested in. I don't care much talking about 1,500 year ago books and arguing about the small creed on these texts. My position is I'm a universalist, so I think all religions have got something good going for them, but they're not all accurate. Yeah?
Okay.
The core teachings are often very, very similar and cool, but I expect corruption and problems and misunderstanding in the branches. I don't take that to be a major criticism of the religion, and I assume that the practice is more important than the theory. As well. And I think the practice in Islam, as far as I can see around here, often is very good and very diligent.
But it has its problems like
It
every
has its
system,
problems,
of course.
but I mean it's impressive, you know? I think whole chunks of the theory are highly problematic. Some of it's really cool, some is problematic. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, so again, if I can understand your standard, are you English?
Yeah.
Where were you like raised and everything? London?
Yeah.
London, okay. So you technically, people come forth with ideas and standards they don't even dare to question.
Yeah.
It's just assumed. So they measure the world by these standards. So if you're really to be critical, you have to be critical first and foremost to what your stand is. So if you say Islam is wrong in this place, it's because you're using a standard. Do you understand? So we
I'm
have to
taking
be...
Islam to be a spectrum of belief. Anyone who self-identifies as Muslim, I take to be Muslim. Out the gate. So that covers everything from Sufi to conservative. It's a spectrum.
So, but what I'm saying is that some things in Islam that you might not find palatable is because the standard you're using, whether and what you assuming you're English, there's strong presence of liberalism, feminism, and
it's a possibility.
so it's a reality.
It's a possibility. It's a reality. It's
because this country is a liberal country, and it also has a lot of feminism and sexual liberation, and all of these thoughts and ideologies were found, not just found. It was developed by major players from the UK.
I'm actively a liberal. I think maximising freedom of speech and freedom of autonomy is a good thing. I think each individual should and will be judged on their choices, but as far as possible, they should be free to make those choices. Which actually brings me to the question I was going to ask you, right?
Not to say I can answer it, but I can engage.
I tried to pick something that wouldn't be contentious, but would be a thought experiment. So my thought experiment is this: I believe in Islam and certain other religions. It's believed that you are born a Muslim, and I think Christians would believe that you're born innocent.
Ala fitra, kullu mawlud, every child or birth, baby is born upon a fitra, a natural disposition.
Okay, you believe that?
Not necessarily. There is a narration we say Islam, but mostly that we say fitra, like a disposition. You're inclined towards the belief of God, for example.
And because I'm a universalist, I'm trying to think of a wider thought experiment. I think there are other religions where when a child is born, it's considered to be sort of innocent. Therefore, if it dies the next second, it goes to heaven.
Yes, this is what I believe.
So here's the thought experiment. If it's the case that when a child is born, it's in a state of kind of innocence, and if it dies, it will go to heaven. If I'm the parent of that child, and I want to maximise the child's chance of going to heaven, why shouldn't I instantly contain it in a sealed room, never expose it to any negative input, keep it alive, and then that will maximise the chance, surely, that when the child dies, it'll go to heaven. If I'm a good parent, my thought experiment, which I hope is not contentious, it's just interesting, is why shouldn't you? Now, I think I have an answer, which I thought up myself.
So we believe the child will go to heaven. If the question is, you put in a child in the question, will you get into heaven?
I think that's the way to go. But do we agree on point A that the child actually would, logically, the child would go to heaven, yeah? Excuse me. Hello? No, what do we do?
Let's pick up our audio, sorry, let it go and let's continue.
Okay.
You may talk too much anyway.
We may or we may not. If you listen, you might find out. So if we can agree on point A, that logically the child will go to heaven. I think
theologically as well.
Theologically. Then I think your instinct is quite right. The problem lies with the choice B. The parent, however, may be committing a sin.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. I could almost stop there. I think we had a good chat. We didn't fall out.
We did
nothing contentious, and then we could come back and do something more. Or we could explore the consequences of that a little bit if you like.
Okay. Let me ask you a question as well. But it's not a debate. I may not know something. I'm happy to say I don't know.
Me too.
And this is what the difference is between debate and discussion. And the people here tend to debate. They interrupt, they shout over each other, and then they say, "I won the discussion because you don't know."
I noticed you didn't do that.
Okay. So I'm happy saying I don't know, and I'm happy with someone here, and I say this all the time, saying they don't know. This and don't know. Okay, so you as a humanist, in terms of a creator, do you believe a creator created you?
Not in the sense that you do, but I could rewire it so it's in a very abstract and mystical way, maybe yes, but I don't believe in the supernatural. But I may be wrong. I think it's highly unlikely I live in a supernatural.
But okay, let's move this to a very sterile language. So leaves the supernatural. Do you believe something caused the universe to exist?
Not necessarily. I go straight in the deep end.
I know. This
Okay,
is
well, are we going straight into the contingency argument?
No, I'm not going to go
I
to
would
any.
go there. That's what I'm working on.
I'm happy just to talk.
No, the contingency argument seems to be the backbone of the operation. I'm happy to go there, but I'd like to ease into it.
No, I'm not going
No,
into that.
I
I just want to know what's operating here for you. I need to engage.
I think it seems to me possible that I'm not a physicist, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Today I've just spent 4 hours talking to a Muslim physicist who's over there called Awad.
Yeah.
Really nice guy, and he's answered me a question about physics I've been fighting for 10 years. So I'm a happy guy.
Yeah.
It turned out I was wrong, but that's okay because I learned something, right? The answer is I don't know because I'm not a physicist. I consider it possible the universe had a beginning, but I also consider it possible, based on what the Nobel Prize winners are saying, based on what the National Association of Science is saying, that the universe is eternal. In other words, infinite in time.
Yeah. So what is steady state model, inflation, big crunch, and
There's a series of models which entertain the possibility that matter and energy were always here. Yeah? So I'm using modal logic, and I'm going, I'll see how the universe works if it's like that. And when it's about the matter and the energy, when it's about God, if God is eternal, that's not the meat. I mean the stuff that we're made of. I'll use modal logic.
so for you, like sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Forgive me. So it's always been there. That's what you believe at the moment. It's always been there.
I believe it's possible.
It's possible. Okay.
That's okay. So I've got
I want
to
to
defer
talk
to
to
the
you.
sign. Well, that is my view. I look at everything probabilistically.
Yeah.
I think there's very few certainties. So when you said, I don't know is a good answer, that's right, I don't know.
Where's your probability? So I understand your possibility. Now moving to your
To
probability.
me, I think it now feels increasingly likely. So I'm now about 60% it was eternal in time.
Based on?
Based on kind of the law of elimination. It seems to me there's 4 options here. Yeah? There's the idea that there was nothing, then there was something. And there's also the issue of order and chaos. Yeah? And we make assumptions. So the options are either in the beginning there was something which was chaotic, there was always something chaotic, or there was always something ordered, or there was always ordered nothing, or there was always chaotic nothing. Ordered chaos and chaotic nothing are the same thing. Yeah? So that leaves 3 options. Either there was nothing, or there was ordered chaos, or there was ordered stuff, by which I mean matter and energy always, or there was chaotic stuff. Those seem to be the only 3 options.
So can we look at that in application? So when you look at all of this, essentially you think all of this beauty, sophistication, even abstract things such as love, mercy, compassion, are all side effects of chaos?
No, I don't. That's my point. I'm using elimination. But modally, let's model all 3 of those possible universes.
Yeah.
And of those, it seems to me as a layman, the most likely one, maybe 60%, is that there was always ordered matter and energy, as opposed to chaotic matter or energy, or nothing. The idea of nothing seems increasingly improbable in the physics.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you say ordered, so break this down to me as a layman, not a physicist. When you say ordered, because matter rearranges itself, especially when we're talking about...
But according to underlying laws of nature, in other words, that as a brute fact, in kind of...
Entropy gets worse.
Entropy would be in play as a law of nature, but I guess I am doing Bertrand Russell, but I should put it on the cards. I think every logical inference must contain a brute assumption of fact, an assertion of faith.
Yeah, of course.
So if you start with the assertion of
Axioms.
faith that I'm all about axioms. I'm all about axioms.
But
if you start with the axiom that there was always matter and energy in an ordered state, however counterintuitive that seems, and it does seem counterintuitive,
so what does ordered state mean? That's what I was asking.
it means it has principles and laws which govern it in a self-consistent fashion.
Okay. So where did those laws come from?
They may just be brute facts. I'm exploring the possibility of many people have.
Yeah, so but there's a reason why. It's because these laws are ultimately what governs everything, as you mentioned. Because the matter moves, it rearranges this and that. But these laws which cause all of this, where did these laws come? Is it a lawgiver?
I'm saying there may be a brute. I've got 3 modes, A, B, C. In mode C, they're brute facts which are always there. And we're not talking about subjects or qualia. We're talking only about objects. In mode B, the matter would have to be chaotic, and that doesn't make any sense, because if it's chaotic we couldn't have a conversation, because we need a certain amount of order just to exist. Yes, so I think B looks very unlikely. It looks like 1%. And then there's the nothing idea. Now the nothing idea is very popular, that there used to be nothing, and it's intuitively your first port of call. But the more you look at it, the science would seem to indicate there is no evidence for physical nothingness. There is always either energy or matter or vacuum energy, even in the darkest reaches of space. And if that's the case, there's a possibility that this idea of nothing was never there, which means it reduces the necessity for an external creator. It doesn't disprove God, it doesn't eliminate God, it simply reduces the probability. Yeah? So I'm looking at it now.
So you're looking at 60-40
I'm going about 60-40, and even if it's the 40, even if it's my 60th option, that doesn't eliminate the possibility of God, but it means you've got to recontextualize what you're talking about.
So how do you live as someone who's agnostic? Let's say, for example, when you take away meaning and purpose, this is my question to you, I suppose, I don't know, maybe if we like just ask short questions to each other. The whole concept of meaning. How do you give life meaning and purpose when you have no ultimate purpose? As a not atheist,
I don't think it inevitably follows from option C that life has no purpose or teleology. I don't think that automatically follows. I do understand,
because a lot of atheists fall into materialism, nihilism, and depression, and you know, especially as a man, it's like you have this kind of disposition as to be functional.
No, I think what religion is bringing to the table is teleology and meaning and purpose and values. That's the remit of religion. And to be honest, I'm interested in axioms, and I'm very interested in the notion that religion historically has tried to define its arguments. Sorry, I think you're blocking defined its arguments in terms of the physics, and I think it should be plugging into the metaphysics of qualia and consciousness. So meaning is all about values and consciousness and the hard problem of consciousness and deep stuff. I think all religion is really about. The physics, I think history shows more and more.
The problem that I would have here is that I understand, as me personally, I understand knowledge has limits. Our lifespan is limited as well. Our inquiry and our tools and even the fields in itself is developing. Everything has limits. To me, there has to be an end. There has to be an acknowledgement that we have limits.
Absolutely.
So we have to get to the destination, not just dwindle in the journey. It's lovely to dwindle in the journey, to look around, to appreciate life and this and that, but we must know where we are going. This is for me, my person. I'll just tell you my position. So ultimately, when I look at the world, even in the Quran it says, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تَبْصِرُونَ, and in your own self, do you not ponder? And this is for me, it's like that whole rearrangement of matter and atoms. You know, when you look at everything, it's just impossible. You look at cell biology, the mitochondria, the ATP turn into the ADP and all this.
You know more than I do on that.
It's like, you know, it's brain blowing like. And you look at the DNA in every single cell of your body, along with the RNA and the processes. For me, it's so hard to fathom that there's no guidance in this. You know, so this is where I stand, and I know that there's a limit to my knowledge. I know there's a development in all sciences, and I also appreciate that sciences, it can take us in a direction, not just science itself, I mean every science knowledge that we have. It can take us in a direction for many years, and it can also be turned to be wrong, like a geocentric universe, or, you know, we've had many different models.
The problem is, how does one create a view of the world, the physical world, which is objective and honest as possible, and synthesize it with a teleological and ethical model of the world?
So then I suppose here you apply all your knowledge, where there's mathematics, logic, and this is very basic. So we have to limit it down to what we know. Let's say that there is a personal God. So we've got Judaism. If, for example, there's a concept of disorder, if the universe had more than two lords, and this is what the Quran says, two gods, two gods, لَفَسَدَتَا, it would have been destroyed. It's like you go to any organization, you don't have two bosses, and there's a reason for that. It's because one will differs from another will, and when two wills collide, then there's chaos. And this is the argument that we have, even in Greek philosophy, which I'm not a fan of.
I'm a monist, a monotheist like you. I agree. It seems the universe should reconcile to one axiom, and I want to hunt axiom.
The rule of many is bad. Let there be one. This is even what the Greeks used to say.
However, I don't have a problem with the Trinity the way you do. they do, for example, but we don't need to go there.
You're going to open up a new box.
Another time. So the Trinity is just constantly banged on about. To me, it's fairly easy, but what the hell?
So let's try to get as much as we can in this last few minutes, because the other guy's been waiting for a while. Yeah, you know the other guy that came with the camera. So my position is that knowledge has all has limits. Our knowledge, communal knowledge, even in the fields, every single field is developing, and every field relies on another field. You know, it's all network. And I acknowledge that this shortcoming will never allow us to get into total confidence with probability, for us to have that scientific certainty. Yeah, sure. To have that scientific certainty. But this is where I take...
I'm not claiming I'm not claiming certainty. I'm saying the reality of the
scientific. I say scientific.
Is that we're actually deeply uncertain.
Yeah.
What surprises me... Sorry, you need to...
No, it wasn't this one. It was another guy.
What worries me about a lot of conservative religion, not all, but some, I mean, I favour the Sufi end of the spectrum, is the amount of certainty I hear. It's not the ideas that I hear, it's when I hear people going, I'm 100% sure. The minute I hear somebody going, oh, I'm 100% sure of this or that, I start to wonder about how honest they're being with themselves and how objective they're being. Because they seem to be knocking out the necessity. They seem to be knocking out the necessity for faith. For me, faith is the backbone of religion. I grew up in
so we have this faith, we have this, it's called ilm al-ghayb, things that we cannot see and that we believe in, and tu'minu billah, we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So what are you uncertain about? What is it which you're just asserting as
we believe in this. This is what we say,
but what are you uncertain about? What is it that you're not 100% epistemologically certain about? Because I'm not 100% epistemologically sure of anything except I am. That's it. Everything else is on a sliding scale of probability.
You know what we'll do? What we do, let me get back to you on this next time, if that's all right with you. The reason is because this topic is I know we're gonna spend some time, and I need to also refresh some notes as well on this. Because I'm not going to claim here that I can get into this subject.
Was good because I've watched you and I love the way you gave people time and your attitude. So I'd like to get more dialogue.
Well, I appreciate that. You've taught me a lot. Obviously, you know what I believe, isn't it?
I'm very assumptions. I don't know. You seem to me to be on the liberal end of the spectrum.
No. I'm so orthodox, more conservative than most people. So conservative, really? so conservative.
But
I'm nice.
You conduct yourself.
I'm nice to people, but I'm super conservative like that. But I don't think I am. But when I see things in my head, I'm thinking. But people don't realize. But I've lived in Saudi for 10 years. But I've seen the fruit on conservatism and traditionalism and family structures and law. You know, this is one thing I was thinking to myself. When you have law which is strong, the practice can be weak. So you can have a weak police force. Like in Saudi Arabia, I see the policing is really weak. But then you go in America, the policing is so harsh because the laws are so liberal. And this is what Islam is like. People think liberal and conservative. The laws in Islam is harsh, but it works in a way to deter people, deterrent, and it stops the crime. So people in Saudi Arabia, even in England before, as you know, it's very communal. They had harsh penalties, but they could leave their doors open all day without the fear of someone coming in, intruding into your house and robbing you. But so
you know Vlad the Impaler?
But this is something to do.
There's a story about Vlad the Impaler. Apparently, he used to be able in his empire, he used to be able to leave gold goblets in the town squares, in the fountains and stuff. And even though the people there were virtually starving to death, nobody would steal them. The reason for that was they knew that if there was even a rumour they'd broken the law, they'd be impaled on wooden sticks up their bums and left out in public. He kept an excellent state of law, but I'm of the opinion he may have gone a bit too far.
But this is it. This is different from someone who is given a ajr, like a reward in the hereafter. There's a video clip of a Sudanese man who is a Bedouin. He's in the desert, a car comes and says, give me one of the camels, I will give you 20 million, this and that. He rejects it. He doesn't know anyone's recording it, but he rejects it. And he said, look, no one is looking. He said, Allah is looking. So he believes, that belief stops him. And you see now videos on TikTok and YouTube and all these social media. People are leaving their phones in these Emirati countries, which are very strict in the application of Sharia to a certain degree. They will leave their phone in their car, they go gym and they come back and the phone is still there. So
Which is good.
Which is good.
My question to you though is how far is too far? How far is too? Because I'm in no doubt that we have got. You know what? We did good, and now we're getting more potentially contentious. And I'd like to just end. Is that good?
Yeah, that was brilliant.
Let's
Let's continue. Let's continue.
That'd be true.
Okay, it was brilliant speaking to you. Thank you very much, man. You've read the Quran and everything already, right?
I've done the first 100 pages.
Yeah.
And I'm going to
Let's continue. We'll continue next course, and I'll give you down. You can teach me something. Okay? Thanks. Thanks. Nice.
Just a quick question. If you've got 10 seconds.
No, you know I'm not a chef, man.
No.
I'm a layman.
You have knowledge.
Oh, I just put it there, sorry. My bad. You got the sophisticated one.
The water for you.
Oh, barakallah, because you will go for me, yeah? Oh, nice, my man.
I always just like to ask for your opinion because of the way you carry yourself. And if you say you don't know, that's
Yeah, billah.
Fakhruddin al-Razi said that the Quran and the Hadith are not hujjah basically, but he said that it's not